Welcome, fellow legends. Today we have top 5 Pokemon that became good years later by False Swipe Gaming.
We're back with more Pokemon that were previously low tier and took a while to become bastions of the respective OU metagames. If you haven't seen the first video, make sure to check that one out as well. But here's the gist. Just because a generation stops being current doesn't mean it's no longer played, and as past gen OUs continue to be played, they continue to see significant metagame development, including the rise of previously rarely or completely unseen Pokemon. In the previous video, Advanced Moltres took the longest time to break into OU by far, taking about a decade between the end of Advance and it being established as a legitimate threat.
It's wild that it took it near a decade. That is wild. What other Pokemon do we have that still could be undiscovered gems in their own formats? Makes you think, right?
Everything in this video has taken at least a decade and a half to do the same, with the exception of the first Pokemon, which missed out on the feat just barely. And again, this is not about Pokemon who became good in the next generation, but instead it's about the ones who were discovered to be good in the same generation. So without further ado, let's jump back into the Pokemon that, given enough time, proved themselves to be great. And here are the top 5 Pokemon who became good years later in singles.
Which is, it's an important distinction because there will be Pokemon that were not good in the generation prior, and then next gen they get a buff, right? And then it's just like, oh, now we're cooking.
And also, here is a top 5 VPN because this video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Surfshark is an app and browser extension that allows you to place your computer or phone virtually in any country as if you're actually there. Surfshark has 3,200 plus servers in 65 countries. And by using Surfshark to connect to servers in other countries, you can get access to content that is normally region locked. Rick and Morty's 6th season is out right now, and I need to catch up on the series. But it's not on Netflix. American Netflix, that is. If I change my IP to the UK, the first 5 seasons of Rick and Morty are right here, and I only need to use Netflix. Surfshark encrypts your data and keeps it safe when you're connected no matter where you are.
It's wild to think that streaming was the answer back in the day too. Not that I can professionally encourage this, right? It was the answer to piracy, where you would get all these, cable channels, all these satellite networks, all these commercials. And so what was the answer, right? The answer was streaming services. Netflix, we're going to mail you the disc to your door and then you'll send it back. And then it had streaming. It was arguably the answer. But now it's just recreated the problems that made them prevalent to begin with. There's too many streaming services. And even when you get on the streaming service, as mentioned, right? Rick and Morty's on Netflix, but not American Netflix. You had to be in another country entirely to do that. So, thus, and I'm just speaking from a factual standpoint, not that I've done this, not that I can encourage this as a content creator, that's, what encourages piracy. And so it's wild to see how trends just repeat themselves. I get that territorial laws, I get that territorial contracts and stuff exist, but it is really just kind of stupid when you think about, I wanted to watch this specific thing that Netflix has the license to, but, they're not going to show it to me because they opt not to, arguably. And thus you have to rely on a VPN or to move to a different country entirely. But even then, if you move, they could just take it off at a moment's notice, So it's just very interesting to see how society as well as tech has developed in this regard.
This comes especially handy when connecting to public Wi-Fi. And Surfshark is also the only VPN service to let you use one account on unlimited devices. So you can have it on a phone, a tablet. Basically, if you have more than one device, you only need one Surfshark account. So if you want an awesome VPN and also support the channel to help us produce more content, you can use my promo code FALSESWIPE or check the link in the description below and get Surfshark VPN at 83% off and 3 extra months for free.
Breloom, my beloved.
In Generation 3, the type-based physical special split means Breloom doesn't have Grass Stab. Its Spore was also not always too valuable a weapon in a metagame so populated by Rest Talk. Fighting-resistant Zapdos is most common user. However, eventually it was discovered that Sleep Talk doesn't burn sleep turns if you can't ride out the sleep without switching, and Rest Talk fell out of the metagame. And eventually, Breloom's time came. Its ability to threaten out tier staples in Tyranitar, Blissey, and Snorlax was enormous. First, it put something out of commission with Spore, which was huge in and of itself.
Level 54 Shroomish. A lot of people would evolve Shroomish and completely miss it because it doesn't learn it until level 54, and then you evolve into Breloom. If you evolve to Breloom when it's, technically supposed to, right? On level, you will miss Spore because Breloom cannot learn Spore at that
Then
point.
it launched a huge focus punch that stung even Resist like Zapdos. It wasn't just a one and done poke either. Its powerful Sky Uppercut was a strong stab move in one-on-one situations against the aforementioned targets even once Sleep Clause was active, while Mach Punch had the absolute incredible utility of checking the most dangerous sweeper in the tier, Dragon Dance Tyranitar. No matter how
That's a 4x on that too, so Mach Punch you have priority with a 4x on the T-Tar.
how many DDs it had accumulated. Breloom could also turn the tier's fighting resist to its advantage. Any Salamence or Gengar looking to take it would get ruined by Stun Spore, while Celebi and Clado got stung by HP Bug. This made Breloom a team player as much as it was a threat in its own right. Breloom could even use an absurdly obnoxious substitute Leech Seed set. However, its greatest strength was always, of course, Spore. The one-up it provided via shutdown of a crucial opposing piece was vital for offensive teams to be able to break through otherwise irritating defense. This
Unfortunately, Gen 7 saw Breloom really take a hit in terms of usage, where Psychic Terrain completely from Tapu Lele completely nullified all priority moves, so it couldn't use Mach Punch anymore. You had Electric Terrain, which meant that you couldn't be put to sleep, so Spore was useless at that point. And it just really hasn't been this. Like, the terrains kind of changed it. And yes, terrains have been nerfed from Gen 8, and I think in Gen 9 now, right? For those that have it. Yeah, because the Pincurchin you can still catch with HA. However, it is one of those things that it's like Breloom just sees a lot less usage now because there are certain tools to deal with it that are not hard to get up. It's really not hard to get up a Misty Terrain. It's really not hard to get up a Psychic or Electric Terrain. It's really not, especially if you're playing in a higher tier format that allows like Tapus and stuff. Very sad that Breloom just sees less usage now.
was similarly useful in faster-paced offensive slugfests. Breloom's presence in the metagame, which saw it eventually make the leap from BL to OU, caused a huge upsurge in Lumberry, Sleep Talk, and even calls to ban the sleep status as a whole. That's how obnoxiously impactful it was. In the beginning, GSC was
That is the updated sprite. Okay, there was an original Jinx sprite, which I won't get into the difference.
characterized by the stalliest of dedicated stall teams. Then offensive teams centered around Explosion flipped the metagame on its head. They took advantage of stall and took over the metagame. One couldn't go wrong with the offensive framework of Snorlax, Zapdos, Cloyster, Exeggutor, Steelix, and the filler. Eventually, the most defining one became Machamp. The consistency of these boom teams, as they were referred to, was nigh unparalleled. There was almost no downside to using them.
I missed that Pokeball opening animation. Like, Stadium really went hard. Stadium and Coliseum, and even Battle Revolution, they really went hard, and I really want another one of these games. And it's been said a lot that, well, Pokemon can't cram 1,000+ Pokemon into a game. Okay, so that's fine. If you're gonna make, your Scarlet Violet, if you're gonna make your Sword and Shield, that they're gonna have regional dexes, true regional dexes, meaning that we're missing Pokemon, just make a Stadium and or Coliseum and or Battle Revolution style game. That's all it is. There's no story. It's just battling. It's just moving things around, maybe leveling things up depending on what you want to do with it. Make a base platform for all of the Pokemon, and then you're gonna have a lot less people, because I still can't really bring Alolan Muck over, and I'm just heartbroken by that. I love my Rainbow Trash. He's beautiful. I love him, but I can't bring him. I really can't bring him up, and it's just a little distressing to me.
Even if the opponent knew they were coming, and that's what made them so good. Several players made such teams their trademark for this very reason. Boom teams had such a stranglehold on GSC that several other players complained about it. They said they were too good and too difficult to stop reliably. GSC was too fast. Then Jinx came along. Jinx utterly shredded Boom offense teams. Their sleep talker, Zapdos, did not want to absorb sleep from its lovely kiss, terrified as it was of Jinx's mighty stab Ice Beam. Jinx's stab shredded pretty much every Pokemon on those teams that wasn't Snorlax. And Snorlax, great as it was, wasn't immovable, especially when it was the only thing holding these teams together from being run straight through by Jinx. Plus, Jinx was a superb user of Thief, and if Lax lost his leftovers, easier then. Jinx single-handedly changed the GSC metagame. It removed old school Boom offense from the tier in favor of a renewed all-out special attacking onslaught bolstered by Thief, and forced Snorlax into using sets with Sleep Talk just to slow it down. Effectively, it forced Lax to be a wall, and not a wall and an offensive threat. We haven't even mentioned Jinx's infuriating capacity to freeze. 10% isn't a lot, but when you're spamming Ice Beam left and right, the odds become nastily more in Jinx's favor with each attack, and this is particularly devastating with GSC's paltry 10% defrost rate. Jinx encouraged entire teams to spam freeze induce.
Was that a shiny Ember?
Moves, and was itself so effective in facilitating the strategy that it is almost solely responsible for the existence of freeze claws in GSC, despite the fact
That's nutty.
that it breaks game mechanics. Getting one freeze was often devastating enough, but two was just unfair, and Jinx helped its team achieve this far more than was healthy for the tier. Its efficacy in achieving just one freeze continued afterwards, to the point of some players wanting to ban Jinx itself for how much it encouraged fishing for luck. In addition to freeze, it also had a long track record of looking for 10% special defense drops with Psychic. It wasn't just a slot machine though, it was a ferocious offensive threat in its own right, and could even punish attempts to beat it through resting, sleep-talking walls by slotting Nightmare into its last move slot. And so Jinx completely changed Gen 2 OU a decade and a half after it had ceased to be the current generation.
That's nutty. That's nutty to think about. Just a Pokemon that's really overlooked as Jinx is, right? I mean, like, a lot of people I feel overlook Jinx. Just a decade and a half after, just like, someone's just like, I got an idea. Hear me out. And they bring Jinx in. And this Boom player is just like, how? What? And then you just see repeated successes with Jinx. And it's just like, shit, this metagame isn't as solved as we thought it was. Which, if anything, that's brilliant to know. A solved metagame to me is a boring metagame, right? You go back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Teledad, right? I thankfully avoided it. That's what's a format where Yu-Gi-Oh! Almost died, from my understanding. I mean, that's the joke at this point. How many times has Yu-Gi-Oh! Almost died? But you have things like Teledad, where it's just like, this is the deck you play. What else do you play? Teledad. What else do you play? Anti-Teledad. What else do you play? I mean, those are the really two options there. Everything else is rogue, and everything else is just bodied by Teledad and anti-Teledad, right? So, I mean, I would argue a stale format, a limited format like that, is going to be a stale and boring format, right? So, thus, having tools like Jinx, Pokemon like Jinx, that a lot of people overlook. They still exist. They still have a skill set. They have a moveset. They got stats. They have, after Gen 2, they have abilities too. Like, it's just, you can find these hidden gems a decade and a half after. It's so wild to me.
And speaking of Pokemon that changed to OU a decade and a half after it had ceased to be the current generation, next up is Golem. Its impact wasn't quite as seismic as Jinx's, but it really wasn't far behind. While it didn't knock entire team styles out of the tier, what it did do was reshape existing team styles into a greater focus on Rapid Spin, even on offensive teams which previously couldn't spin most of the time. Rapid Spin and Explosion were illegal on the same Cloyster set, and most of the time, you wanted Cloyster to boom. It being offensively threatening was a big reason for it being as spammable as it was. Fortress didn't have this problem, but it was much more difficult to fit onto teams than Cloyster thanks to its pathetic speed, crippling quadruple fire weakness. Thus, you couldn't fit spin on your spiker most of the time. Plus, relying on one Pokemon to spike and spin could sometimes be too much for it to do in one battle. What about using other Pokemon to spin? Well, on bulky teams, maybe, but you weren't fitting the highly passive Starmie on offense, especially since it didn't provide much necessary defense utility for them. It could be tough to slot even on bulky teams for this reason. With Golem, this all changed. It was a rapid spinner that possessed both the defensive qualities necessary for every team, i.e. a normal resistance to help against Snorlax, meaning it could roar out a sleeping Curselax without fearing a boosted Sleep Talk normal move, and the Thunder Resist or immunity to help pivot around the dangerous electric Zapdos and Raikou.
That's wild. Yeah, no, he meets a lot of criteria that the tier is needing from that explanation. He meets the ability to explode, and, well, I guess, or spin, because technically it's legal on the same set, right? He has the immunity to arguably two of the greatest offensive threats in the tier, or at least two of the greatest offensive threats, being strong electric types, Zapdos and Raikou. It also is going to resist normal type, right? That's fucking wild. And
it did this while still being offensively threatening thanks to Explosion. Of course, with its sets of Earthquake, Rapid Spin, Roar, and Explosion, it couldn't actually threaten Zapdos.
No, I guess you could run both
without booming. But that was the beauty of Golem. It didn't need to. Rapid spinning and clearing spikes away for his teammate Snorlax was all it needed to do, as Lax not being worn down by spikes was nearly immortal. Another thing that made Golem superb was how it was nearly impossible to spin block. Gengar was instantly dropped by its Earthquake, while Misdreavus was slammed quite hard as well. Golem was great on stall teams as well, but it was most defining for how it changed offense. It went from never being seen to becoming the most used rock type in the tier, more common than Tyranitar.
That's saying something, because T-Tar is one of the defining Pokemon of Gen 2, right? I mean, we still use T-Tar today in a heavy capacity. It's just so good.
And almost completely displacing Rhydon, while also eclipsing the previous ground-type standard on offense, Steelix. And so Golem changed the metagame and became one of the best Pokemon in Gen 2 OU.
That's wild. I think Gen 2 does have the misfortune of being slotted into a very stall-oriented metagame. Because that's just what worked, right? You ran your Snorlax, you ran your bulky water type Suicune, you ran your Raikou and Zapdos. You know, I think Lugia, nicknamed the Great Wall, also had a very big defensive stat as well. I mean, I think it was just a very tanky focused metagame. And I think that did bias a lot of players against certain options. So it's very interesting to see how years later these just come out. These just come to the surface, and they do things.
For a long time,
That's an interesting one.
RBY games began with Alakazam facing down another Alakazam, or a Starmie. They would exchange Thunder Waves, then see who would be forced to switch out first. The rest of these teams would be occupied by, of course, the big four of Tauros, Snorlax, Chansey, and Exeggutor. And their last was, quite commonly, Rhydon, a hard counter to the terrifying Zapdos and a monstrous offensive threat in its own right. This set of 6 was reliable, consistent, dominant, all that good stuff. And once that Alakazam or Starmie took paralysis, they were almost single-handedly ruined by Victory Bell. It was faster than everything except Tauros, which allowed it to get free turns with Wrap. And it wasn't just threatening with Wrap, though it also wielded a powerful Razor Leaf, which was an automatic critical hit coming off of Victory Bell's strong special set.
This is also relevant to note that it was about Victory Bell. Because it was going to be, I think because it was the crit rate as well. Give me 1 second. There was an actual
powerful Razor Leaf, which was an automatic critical hit coming off of Victory Bell's strong special set. You couldn't safely switch around it because...
No, I think it was something about Tauros. Being able to outspeed everything but Tauros is actually really important in terms of the speed tier. I literally paused it and I lost it. But no, that is not a bad speed tier to be in, as well as having that high of a speed for a crit rate. Ooh.
Whatever came in would be slower, meaning it gets stuffed by Wrap, and its Razor Leafs hit hard. Your one faster Pokemon would be Tauros, and using Tauros to try and deal with Victory Bell was favorable for the Victory Bell user. The chip damage forced on Tauros...
Oh, that was it. Wrap. Wrap works completely different as it did now. Wrap was, if you wrapped, you could continue wrapping, and it just stalled your opponent out. You were getting off chip damage, and they couldn't move. Gen 1 Wrap is nutty.
Tauros alone was useful for Victory Bell's own Tauros to gain a huge advantage, but Victory Bell could also choose to Stun Spore and ruin Tauros entirely. Alternatively, Victory Bell made excellent use of Hyper Beam, which allowed it to finish off Chansey from much higher ranges. Victory Bell was so good, you almost forgot that it also packed Sleep Powder, of all things. But it most certainly did, allowing it to shut down an opposing Pokemon even more directly and provide a window for it to launch its Razor Leafs. Blocking its sleeps wasn't exactly easy either. After all, you needed to be paralyzed for that to be the case, and if you were paralyzed, you were going to be vulnerable to Wrap. Victory Bell dominated teams so hard that it caused a shift in how RBY was played. Suddenly, lead Psychics no longer wanted to take paralysis unless there was a second fast Psychic in the back, lest they get completely thrashed by Victory Bell. And as a result of Victory Bell teaching OU this lesson with such brutal force, it rolls from BL to join the tier itself.
How does that Tauros animation from like 1999 in Stadium, how does this Tauros animation have more life in it than modern Pokemon models? That's the thing that blows my mind. Can we go back to this like style of art? Can we go back to Pokemon moving like that? That's wild.
Finally, we have some honorary mentions. Advanced Charizard rose in a manner similar to Moltres. It wasn't as powerful and lacked Will-O-Wisp, but it had significant advantages in higher speed, as well as access to Focus Punch and Dragon Claw. DPP Quagsire appeared at the end of the generation to stifle the Life Orb Starmie, offensive Suicune, and Choice Specs Kingdra running wild everywhere, and was generally a pain for offensive teams to handle, as it also stuffed offensive Zapdos and many Heatran variants incredibly hard. In Black and White, Mienshao rose for its outstanding speed tier and incredible offensive threat level, becoming both a ferocious Life Orb attacker and a reliable Choice Scarf Revenge killer and cleaner. There are so many more Pokemon that could be mentioned in these types of videos, but maybe we'll see them next time.
Yeah. He. Also, XD Gale of Darkness music goes hard.
And we finish this with Moltres 1.
This is actually wild. Gen 1 Moltres. Really? That blows my mind, actually.
More, marking it as the only Pokemon in these videos to appear in 2 different generations. 3 if you count its honorary mention in the previous video. And the second Pokemon in these videos to appear in OU, despite being tiered as low as NU. This time, it's marked as a tremendous late discovery in RBYOU, 2 decades after it stopped being the current, or rather only generation. Generally, Burn isn't a status you toss around carelessly in RBY. It only deals 6.25% per turn, so Pokemon like Alakazam, Starmie, and Chansey even welcome it, as it allows them to block sleep, paralysis, and freeze, all of which are far more reliable at forcing progress on the opponent. Indeed, fire moves in general are rare precisely because by using them, you risk undoing the effective KO you scored on the opponent by freezing them in the first place. However, when played to its strengths, Burn can be utilized to great effect, both on Tauros and of course on Moltres. At first, Articuno was seen as the underrated bird in RBYOU because its Blizzard is the strongest special attack in the game, even stronger than Mewtwo's Psychic. Problem with Articuno is that when it's walled, such as when it faces Lapras or Cloyster, it's walled. It has very little way of making its way past its checks itself. Moltres didn't have this problem, and thus established its role. First generation, Fire Blast has a 30% chance to burn. Thank Arceus that didn't stick around. Now alone, 6.25% from burn isn't that much. However, in conjunction with the unstoppable force chip damage from Fire Spin, the opponent can very quickly be put in an uncomfortable position. And when Moltres agility's late game, outspeeding the Alakazam or Starmie its burn, it can easily chip Starmie down. Moltres also boasts over Articuno a higher attack stat, and thus a much more powerful Hyper Beam it can use to seal the deal against Starmie, Chansey, and Alakazam.
Important to note here, as this is a relevant interjection in regard to Hyper Beam, in Gen 1 Hyper Beam on knockout, you would not have to recharge. So for example, your Tauros is, Tauros War, right? And if your Tauros managed to fire off and get a crit on your Hyper Beam and kill and knock out the opposing Tauros, you would not have to recharge. But if you didn't get a crit and you hit the Tauros, but they survived, hit like 5% or whatever, and the other Tauros was still alive, right? It was still up, it was still active. You had to recharge next turn. So Hyper Beam back in Gen 1 RBY was nutty because you could threshold opponents and you could not have to recharge. I really like that as a concept, but obviously it got nerfed for obvious reasons.
As a result, even Moltres' checks aren't necessarily safe against it, and things that aren't its checks get destroyed by its Fire Blast that is tied for the strongest special attack in the game. So Moltres didn't become a metagame defining threat, but it did become a legitimate tournament-worthy Pokemon in RBYOU.
Yeah, that's
Thanks for watching, everyone. And in the comments, again, I want to know what type of different videos would you like to see? We've been loving the feedback you've been giving us so far, so thank you so much for that. But we'd love to know more ideas that you want to see in the future. And thank you to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well.
Maybe some doubles analysis. I'm a huge doubles fan, playing VGC for a number of years. Maybe some doubles content, but honestly, putting out great content. It's awesome.
And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.
This was an epic video. I absolutely loved this. False Swipe Gaming, keep up the great work. That was nothing short of epic, and every time I go through, or go back through even, I learn more things. It is truly a very interesting competitive world of Pokemon, and thank you for shedding a lot of light on it.